Okay, we should be recording. We're 1 minute past. I know that folks sometimes like to trickle in, but good to see everyone. Welcome back. I know that I had the pleasure of being able to see some of you, so thank you for joining us in person. It was so good to be able to give people hugs again after a while. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Cristina Aguilera. I am the program director at HITEC. I know Viviana Costa used to be managing our board readiness program, and I'm so sad that she left us, but we're happy for her. So now you guys have me.
We are privileged to have you.
Thank you, Susan.
Indeed.
I actually live in San Jose, Costa Rica, although I am currently in Miami, Florida right now, enjoying the weather. Okay, any questions so far before we started our check-ins? No? Okay.
No, just a comment. It's not fair to be from Costa Rica and going to Florida and the poor New Yorker ones suffering with the weather. Okay, just a comment.
Yes, I'm sorry for bringing that. Is it really cold over there, you guys? Is it cold in New York?
It's getting better.
It's not that bad today.
Really?
Yeah, just to be clear, cold means 70.
Yes, yeah. So when I went to San Francisco, I was like, oh my God, I don't have clothes for this weather. But surprisingly, the weather in San Francisco was beautiful. I was really happy with it.
So I grew up in Michigan, and swimsuit weather is 40 degrees.
Oh my goodness. No, see, yeah, there I'm freezing. Okay, so I don't want to take up more time. Patricia, which is one of our fearless leaders from KPMG with this program, she wanted us to go ahead and start off with our check-ins, just so that you guys all can have a chance to get to know each other. For those of you that are new to HITEC, our HITEC check-ins is where you say your name, your title, the organization that you work for, and your country of origin, where you live, country that you identify with. Some people like to put in a fun fact after that if you want. No pressure. So we can start off with, I have my list here going. Questions? No? Okay. Let's start off with Alexander. Are you here, Alexander? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Hello.
And for those of you that are not doing your check-ins, if you could just put yourselves on mute, please, so that we don't have any background noise. Okay, I'll let you take it away, Alexander.
I just joined and I missed the instructions.
Yes. Okay. No worries. We're going to take the first few minutes of our session today to do HITEC check-ins, where you say your name, your title, your organization name, and your country of origin, country that you identify with, just so that you guys can kind of get to know each other. FYI, also for folks, make sure that you jot down the person that you might want. There's somebody you might be interested in getting to know some more. You can feel free to look them up on LinkedIn. So that's why these check-ins usually sometimes are good, to help with networking when we do these in the summits. So someone says, oh my gosh, that person's, whatever title from this company, I'm interested in getting to know them. So just in order for you guys to kind of get to know each other.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, happy to go. My name's Alexander Purcell. I work at United Airlines. The global HR partner. I generally support all our technology organization. And I also have a technology background myself. Let's see, my country of origin is Mexico. And is that, I think I hit everything else there.
Yeah, you're good. By the way, Mexico always wins whenever we do these friendly competitions. There's never been a year that Mexico hasn't won, so you're in a good group. Okay, let's see. Álvaro Camarena, ¿estás aquí? Are you here with us? No, I don't think I see him on my list here. Okay, so we'll make a note. What about Andres Woolbridge? Am I pronouncing that right? Un poco. Okay. How about Angela Muniz Rutherford? Me están quedando mal, mi gente, Dios mío. Okay. Bob, you're up. Your turn.
Thank you. I'm Bob West. I'm Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks Prisma Cloud Division. So think of an evangelist, customer advocacy role. I was born in the United States. My mother's from Mexico, and I live in the People's Republic of Boulder.
So cute. Love it. Okay. Claudia. Oh no, Claudia has her daughter's graduation. She did email me. She let me know today. Okay. Claudia Schaefer. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Claudia Schaefer. My parents are from Mexico. I married a German man, so I took his last name. And I'm with Discover Financial Services. I lead our sales organization for the US and Canada. Much of what we sell are technical products and services, so hence why I get to participate in this organization. Great to see everyone.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Diana Navas.
Hello, everyone. Diana Navas Rosette. I am the Senior Director of Diversity and Inclusion for a small company that maybe you have not heard about, Microsoft, the provider of our technology today, Teams. I am the Senior Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and I am originally from Medellin, Colombia, currently located in Seattle, Washington.
I love Colombia. I was just there. Good shopping and good food. Y buenísima gente. Okay, thank you. Diana Rey Marrero.
Hello, everyone. So how about that? I'm from Bogota. So good to meet you, Diana. My name is Diana Bray Marrero. I am the Vice President of Cummins Business Services and Solutions for Cummins. I live in Nashville, and did I forget anything else? No. That's about it, right, Christine? Yeah,
Very
so pleasure to be here and meet everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your check-in. Okay, Eddie, are you with us? Eddie Borrero? Okay. How about Eduardo Salas, one of my E+ folks?
Hi,
Greetings.
Christine. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm here. So, Eduardo Salas. I'm originally from Monterrey, Mexico, and I currently work at Kenvue, which is the new name of the what used to be Johnson & Johnson Consumer, right? We just had our IPO earlier this month, and yeah, very happy to work at Kenvue. I'm based in Pennsylvania. My office is in New Jersey area, and yeah, excited to see everybody here today.
So good to see you again. Thank you for your check-in. Okay, Eduardo Briz. Okay, Manny Ramos. I know Manny joined us in person in San Francisco. Okay, how about Enrique Ortegon?
Hi, how are you? Right here,
Hello.
Enrique Ortegon, responsible for the commercial business unit for North America, a DocuSign, born and raised in Mexico, currently living in San Francisco. Pleasure to be here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Enrique. How about Eric Quiñones?
Hi, everybody. Eric Quiñones. I am one of the chief healthcare advisors at Worldwide Technology, probably one of the largest advanced solution technology companies you may not have ever heard of. However, my country of origin, I would say, is definitely Mexico. And I'm based out here in Los Angeles, been here for all my life and for about 4 other generations as well. So happy to be here and looking forward to learning and working with all of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. Okay, how about Ezekiel Piccione? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, hi, how are you doing? Ezequiel Piccione, how are you doing? I'm Argentinian. I'm currently on the road, that's why I was not on camera. I'm the Vice President of HR for IBM for the Americas, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Ezekiel, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Federico Ferreres.
Hi everyone, my name is Federico Ferreres. I work in SoftTech. It's a software development and IT services company. Unlike the case of Microsoft, maybe some of you have not heard about us. I work in marketing, a senior vice president of marketing innovation and strategy. So part of my curiosity and job is how we can do new things, how we can engage differently, how can we come up with ideas to make our services more valuable to our clients. And unfortunately, I'm not from Mexico, but I'm getting better. I'm from Argentina originally. If anybody is from Argentina, they're gonna, of course, not want to talk to me, but my son is from Mexico, so I'm getting there. And I identify with the US, but also with all the countries in Latin America.
Beautiful, beautiful, Federico. Mil gracias. Okay, Francisco Fraga, I don't know if you're here. He did mention he wasn't going to be able to come, but just in case, I wanted to mention his name. Okay, Ivana Estrada.
All right, yeah, so thank you so much, Christine. So Ivana Estrada, originally from Bolivia, living in New York City. I am currently at Google working in the data and AI organization, primarily in strategy and partnerships. It's very much in line with this program. So I'm super excited about like all the things that we're like discussing and learning from each other, because it becomes a lot of like really looking at the strategy and the key things that we need to do to move things forward, that make decisions, all of those pieces. So can't wait to really get to know each other better and learn from each other and support each other. And yeah, so super excited to be here.
We are so happy to have you, Ivana. Thank you. Mi amigo Andres, I know that you just joined us. Are you, there you are. Hi, how are you?
Hi, everyone. And apologies again for joining late. Just really tough time signing on to Teams. Andres Warburg-Stock. I'm with Citi. I too am originally from Argentina. So I think all we need to do now is organize an asado.
Yes.
There's enough of us. And I'm the global head of strategy for the office of the CTO at Citi. So focusing primarily on emerging technologies for the firm and on regulatory advocacy about emerging technologies. And really delighted to be here with everyone, hoping we can do something constructive together.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andres. Okay, let's see, we have Dr. James Cruz. Are you here with us today?
I am. Thank you, Christina. As you said, I'm Dr. James Cruz. I'm a physician, and I'm the Blue Shield of California Promise Health Plan's Chief Medical Officer. And specifically, Promise Health Plan is a Medicaid focused health plan. So we take care of those individuals that are part of the vulnerable communities in throughout the U.S. And I also wanted just a quick shout out to Eric Quinones. I really I'm digging on your UFW Eagle flag or in your background. So thank you for showing that. And just to say, the country of origin, my family has lived continuously in California for 115 years. So my country of origin is California, distinctively California. So thank you.
See a lot of people clapping there. Thank you, Dr. James. Thank you. Okay, how about Jorge Corral?
Hi, this is Jorge Corral with Accenture. I'm a senior managing director. I'm also the managing partner of our Dallas office. It's nice to see everybody today. I identify as Mexican American. My parents are from Mexico, from Durango, but I was raised in Southern California.
Another Californian. We have a lot on the West Coast. Okay, thank you, Jorge. How about Jorge Benitez?
Hey everyone. Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute myself. Jorge Benitez. I was born and raised in Havana, Cuba. I've been now in the US a little bit longer than I actually got to live in Cuba. So I reached that middle point where I've been here a few more years in the US than in my home country. I live in California, in Oakland to be more specific. I work out of the San Francisco office, and I look after tech support and customer success for Meraki, which is a business unit within Cisco, so Cisco Meraki essentially. Happy to be here, and great to meet many of you who seem to have amazing careers, amazing people. So pleasure to be here.
Gracias, Jorge. Okay, we have two more. Jorge Salafia. Okay. How about, last but not least, Juan Carlitos Cabrera?
Hi, everybody. Okay, Juan Carlos Cabrera. I work for Oracle. I'm the VP of Global Risk Management. I have been with the company for 30 years, combined, 13 with Oracle directly and another 16 with some microsystems. I was part of the some microsystem family that was integrated into Oracle. So I lived in the Bay Area, in Oakland, Piedmont area. I guess, Jorge, we should be able to connect one of these days. We're close enough. I previously worked within Oracle as the Latino Alliance group, as I was a chair for 5 years. Good partnership with HITEC for a long time. EEP alumni, EEP mentor, now in this program, so I'm very grateful to be part of that. So what else? I'm originally from Venezuela, Bejuma, small town close to Valencia, for those that might know something about Venezuela. Small town, they call it the Jardín de Carabobo. It's like the Garden of the State. So I guess a fun fact, when I was like 7, people call me the granddad because I had gray hair. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how I get rid of that. Well, I guess I do know now. I don't have hair, so I don't have to worry about that. So anyway, happy to be here. Happy to be meeting all of you, and excited about the program. So thank you, Christine, and everybody.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our first group. So I had sent you all an email.
Christine.
Sí.
I don't know if I should introduce myself here, but I'm also here, Laercio Albuquerque.
Hola, Laercio. Yes, so I broke you guys into groups so to not take up too much time, because I know Susan and Stephen have a lot of No, it's okay. Are you gonna be able to join us next session in July?
Well, I think so. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so next session in July, we will go ahead with the second group and we'll continue with the check-ins, if that's okay.
No, I just thought
Okay.
that my name was not appearing here, so it's okay.
You're all good.
My name is Christine, sorry. I'm Jorge Salafia. I have some connection issues. I'm a partner at KPMG in Mexico, Argentinian. Half Argentinian, 26 years in Argentina and 20 years in Mexico. We 2 children, Mexican here, also Italian. Nice to meet everyone.
Jorge, and your title and company, did I miss that? I don't know if you mentioned it.
Partner at KPMG Technology.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, excellent. So before we let Susan and Stephen introduce themselves for their check-in and to start our session, just make sure to have everybody on mute so we don't disturb our speakers. Let's see. Let me see if I can try to mute. Okay, let me mute all. And then Stephen and Susan, if you guys want to take yourselves off of mute. And I'll let you guys do your check-ins and you guys can run with the rest of the show. Remember to take yourselves off of mute.
Why don't I start and then Susan will go with the check-in and then lead into doing our what's on our agenda today and a review. I'm so happy to be here. And I am from that country of New York City. And being from New York City, that means I know and love everyone. I literally grew up in Queens with everyone. And people challenge me sometimes. And I can tell you about everyone, including growing up with a young man in elementary school who was from Iran. And then everyone next to me, the whole world lives in Queens. I now live in that part of New York called New Jersey. I'm so happy to be here, and I will pass it to Susan.
Okay, I'm delighted to be here also. I know some of you I had the pleasure of seeing in person in San Francisco. As Christine said, the hugs were amazing. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in person again at some point. I know we're coming up with hosting something in Florida in the future, but just great to see you. I am also from New York, although I grew up in a place that you have to learn the correct pronunciation for. It's Long Island. Not Long Island, Long Island, and we didn't have quite as much diversity as Queens does, but we did have some. We did have some. I went to first grade with someone from Argentina, who the teacher, for whatever reason, assigned her to me because she didn't speak English. I didn't speak Spanish, but we developed a beautiful friendship. And so there we are. Can you see the slides that I've put up? Terrific. Okay, so we are gonna flip through a couple of them. That's us. If we haven't mentioned it, we are both senior advisors at KPMG's Board Leadership Center. And just a couple of other housekeeping things. You will get copies of the slides, as well as the recording will be on the website. I'm not sure where you find it, but Christine knows. So if you have trouble, she can help you there. So don't worry about getting kind of taking extensive notes unless you want to. The other housekeeping is we do want to make this interactive. We have a lot to get through, so we may hurry you through if a question is very long. But please, given the size of the group, it's probably better if you put your hand up rather than taking yourself off mute and speaking up. But feel free to do either. And I would ask also, if you do put your hand up and you've asked a question and it's been answered, please take your hand off, because otherwise we'll get very confused. So this is where we are. For those of you who are in the first session, we did an overview. We'll do a mini recap in a couple of minutes. This is session 2 of session 6, and this really is about ESG and stakeholders. And the reason that we do this is because it is so incredibly important to board members. And it's something that in management, no matter what your role is, it tends not to be top of mind. You're very focused on your day job, your deliverables. And so from a board perspective, because it really is an enterprise-wide perspective, it's critical to have that perspective. So we're going to be going through that. And then just, very quickly as we go along, we're going to talk about board committees. We'll focus on you with your roadmap to the boardroom, talk about boardroom diplomacy, how to have your voice listened to as a board member. And then session 6 will be kind of a review and hot topics in the boardroom. And then there will be a graduation ceremony after that. So for today, this is pretty much just what I've said. HITEC check-in we've done. Okay, here's our recap from last time. I'm just going to go through it very quickly. We talked about what boards do, and if you want more detail, please refer to the prior slides. But you can really kind of put it into a few buckets. Strategy is critical. Every board discussion should have some aspect of strategy in part of that discussion, and that should be always the framework. And when we say strategy, I know different companies and different groups use strategy in different way. We're not talking about strategy with a small s. was talking about, sort of capital S strategy. So enterprise-wide, do we do an acquisition or do we give money back to the shareholders? The, sort of high-level strategy is very much what the board is doing. And capital allocation is a huge piece of that. Where are we placing our big bets? Going around, continuing around clockwise, we talked about compliance. We know that board members don't have the ability necessarily to require compliance, although they absolutely have the ability and the obligation to A, set the tone, and B, provide oversight. And so much of that oversight is the art of the question and really digging in and asking, what are the processes in place to ensure compliance? What kind of checks and balances are there? Those sorts of things. So compliance is very much a board oversight function. Human capital management, years ago, we would have said it's about hiring and firing the CEO. Now, because we're in a space, particularly in tech companies, where every company says our people are our greatest assets, that becomes a enterprise-wide board issue. And so we're seeing boards dig in a little bit more on human capital issues. And as we go through the sessions, we'll dig in a little bit more about what that means. And obviously risk oversight and leadership talent. So I know that was a whirlwind, but again, this is very much an onion. We're going to keep picking on threads of that and going down layers. We talked about, joining a corporate board. It's about what you know and who you know, and just to sort of step back on, what that means. Boards are looking for skill sets, but they're looking for skill sets at that right level of elevation. So they're looking for business leaders who also can bring a specific lens to strategy, whether that's digital transformation, cybersecurity, generative AI, whatever it is. And so what you know and making sure that your skills are relevant both at that high strategic level and also at a point where you've got something that's a superpower that boards are really interested in is going to help you. And then it's a question of being in the right place at the right time with the right skill sets and being visible to the right people. And how do you get visible to the right people? It's who you know. And so it's all about networking. It's all about getting yourself on people's radar as a prospective board member. And we're going to talk about that more in later sessions as well. So now we're at, what we really want to talk about for this session, which is ESG and stakeholders. And Stephen, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Well, thank you. You can stay on that slide for a moment. And so everyone can read it. That's what we're trying to do. But in a nutshell, within the next hour, what we hope to bring is clarity on these two subjects, which sort of go together. ESG, which why don't we start with a definition? And we've learned this. We should define it. Not everyone is exposed to these three letters: environmental, social, and governance. So we want to get clarity on what that is, and clarity on why stakeholders are in the position they are in. And I say this clarity because I think we are dealing with an environment that there is such, everyone has their own definition of ESG, and they can be extraordinarily skewed. And one of the things that we focus on as what we do for our day job as a living is getting the boardroom focused on what it means to them. And there are plenty of times when we've been in boardrooms and there are 9 board members and there's some type of discussion or presentation, and we can see that all 9 have 9 different definitions and they think they're talking about something else. So that is such a big issue. Now, for instance, we recently were in a meeting with a board member who's a board member of one of the companies that's represented here. We're not going to say the company's name. Susan, it was in Orlando or thereabouts, and you know who I'm about to say. And she said, well, we don't, she's a director of this company. We don't have a lot of ESG exposure. and it was we were nice, and then it just we shake our heads in front of her because she thought, and she's not unlike many board members, because she's in the financial services space and not an oil extractor or a gold mine, actually have mines extracting minerals, that she didn't have a lot of ESG exposure. Boy, was she completely wrong. And it showed me that she personally was wrong. And I also wondered what her management team is actually telling her. Because they could be telling her the right thing and she's just brain dead. That could be, we're leaving that out there. Or they're not telling her the right thing. And that happens more often than others. The other example of, I actually dealt with a lead director a few weeks ago, and I didn't even tell Susan this story, and I thought he was well on point in understanding ESG issues and how to the oversight, and it wasn't bothered by it, sort of understood what to do. And then he said the next thing, which again is his point of view. Many people have it, but he says, but I just can't understand, and I don't think it's right that these institutional investors, why should they have such a strong voice and sort of lead the agenda on all these social issues? Who the heck are they, that we, America, the world, need to follow what they're saying? And what I gleaned from that, again, smiling, saying nothing at the time, were 2 points. One, that, and we'll talk about this, he's really talking about large institutional investors, and they're investors. And as Susan hears me say at least once a week to board members, if you're publicly traded, the only natural predator you have as a board of director is a shareholder. They're the ones who vote on you every year. And what we've learned, and I've actually did it, so I spent 10 years as head of stewardship of a very large asset manager, well over $1 trillion under management. Maybe it's 2 trillion at this time. They vote on you every year. And where we are in 2023 versus, let's say, 1999, is that they're more apt to vote against you than they ever were before. It used to be voting against the director was the nuclear option. Now it's becoming a little bit more of the norm. So shareholders matter because they're darn size, and what they do control, and their only lever to push is that vote. The second thing, what I gleaned from that is what I believe was a misunderstanding of the issues that the largest shareholders on this planet were pushing were not necessarily morally related or social. They were tied to their business. And their business was of investing long-term. So I will get to some of those definitions of why those two things matter, ESG and stakeholders. So as we move to the next, and we're going to start with stakeholders. The next slide is around managing stakeholders. And I used the phrase, and so here's a definition. Again, what I hope to do in an hour is that we get great clarity on definitions. If we do anything, that's going to be, you will be so ahead of the game, that game meaning a good portion of sitting directors, if we were able to get clarity on this. That term stakeholders really means anybody and anything that's affected by the corporation. But usually when it's used as stakeholders and shareholders. In reality, shareholders are part of stakeholders. So stakeholders would be the top level term, of which you've had many different stakeholders, including shareholders. But typically, people will say shareholders, and then you have stakeholders. That's fine too. So as this slide shows, you have the institutional investors, retail investors, that's you and me, mom and pop, buying, selling stocks, activist hedge funds, we may get to that, people who advise investors, which are proxy advisors, Wall Street analysts, who follow sectors and make bets and give out their research. By the way, you see that those grouping of balloons or circles there. The institutional investor circle is so much larger than any of the others because that just shows the reality. Since the 1950s, which is a long time ago, most Americans invest in our stock market through aggregated pools of money. There are 401ks, 403bs, different pension plans, mutual funds. That's where most Americans invest. And it's actually those mutual funds, 401ks, other aggregated pools of money, they're the ones who actually show up on this shareholder registry. So BlackRock, and you've all heard of BlackRock, is the biggest shareholder on planet Earth, followed by State Street and Vanguard, or it might be Vanguard and State Street, but the bottom line is that all three of them, and they're usually called the big three, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, are the largest shareholders, if you put them all together, and 98%, I think it's about 86% of the Fortune 500. Actually, I think it's the S&P 1000. They are really big, and the three of them together in any one of your stock could be about 30% or so. So what they say or how they vote matters. So I once had someone say a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, before the pandemic started, who do they think they are, God? And this was in a room of a number of folks, and I raised my hand and said, no, but they're about as close as comes to God when we think about people who have power in corporate America to vote on directors. And if you don't understand that, if you don't appreciate that, then you're going to be in a world of trouble. Shareholders, particularly large institutions, matter. The only other point I'll add here is that they matter because the way they think is long-term, because most of their activity is indexed. And so, and you've all heard of index funds, and many times in the past, which I don't think we should use that term going forward, but typically they're called passive funds as opposed to active. Active is that, well, the market is closed right now, but when it opens up at 9 o'clock tomorrow, if they don't like what Coke is doing, they'll buy Pepsi. They'll trade in and out, actively managing a group. But the institutional investors, many of them have index funds, which they are going to buy. If there's an S&P 500 index fund, they are. I can tell you what they're going to buy tomorrow, which is an S&P 500 fund. That's what their mission is to do. That's what they buy. And what they've realized over years is that the way to affect change at all, it's not buying and selling because you can't do it. You're going to buy whatever the index has told you to buy. That is the promise to people who are buying your fund. Their best way to effectuate change for the benefit of their fund is corporate governance. It's how they vote on different issues. So that's why they pay a real hard attention to all these different issues. So that's the whole bunch of shareholders. Investors are one of the capital markets. That's one of it. And then as we see, there's a regulatory framework as we put up the other parts of the slides. Your labor and production inputs, employees. So Susan, you can go ahead and hit another. There we go. They're all there now. Now, all these different things you have to manage, from employees to what your legislatures are doing or not doing, as important, what they're doing and what they're not doing. And a lot of what the general public has wanted out of corporations today is that because they believe that their federal government and this is not being political, I'm telling a fact, the federal government has been dysfunctional for a long time, meaning things just don't happen. And obviously, we are sitting on a brink of something which is an unforced era called our debt ceiling. What they've demanded, the general public, who are also retail shareholders, who are also pensioners, folks who have their money invested in the market, they want corporations to do a lot of what they think that government should do, but they're not doing it. That's just the way of the world today. So we use this term managing stakeholders as just a thing that the modern director must understand. Whereas if we were 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't use that term. It was probably relevant, but we probably wouldn't use that term. But the idea is that you must, as a head of a company, think about all these different inputs and manage them. The next question you usually get, and Susan gets it all the time, I get it all the time, well, how do you do it? Who do we prioritize? And my simple response is, well, that is why you're a director. That's why they pay you the big bucks, which is how do you prioritize all these different inputs, and then you make that judgment? That is actually your job. And of course, the response is, well, can you give me some advice? I said, yeah, if I were a director getting paid, I can give you some advice. But the idea is that we're not going to avoid, or you're not going to avoid as a director, that there's some playbook that you could pull out that will say, oh, right, okay, we're gonna give employees a raise today. That's what it says. And I have to remind directors that you actually do this all the time. You know, without giving an accounting lesson, there's something on your balance sheet called retained earnings, or the income statement. Is that, you know, every year you look at your revenue minus expenses, taxes, depreciation, and other things. You come out with earnings that are retained, and a decision is made. Are we going to give a dividend to the shareholders? Are we going to take that money fully and invest it in R&D? Are we going to create a new plant? Are we going to save that money and hoard cash because we think bad times are really coming, so we want to hoard that cash? You do it all the time. You prioritize where you're going to put retained earnings, and that's the job. So when Susan showed you that slide earlier about the 6 different things that boards do, including capital allocation, that's the job. You're going to decide what you're going to do with your money. And so where we wind up today, talking about stakeholders, talking about what we're going to say in a couple of seconds around ESG, that stuff's not new. You've done it. And that's how we capture the board, first sort of telling them giving to them what's familiar, and then working through how you manage that. I'm going to pause right there because I think I saw a hand, Susan.
Yeah, Eduardo, and then Miguel next. But
Yes,
Eduardo.
I have a question. Some of the decision that you mentioned, I thought it was more under the executive committee, right? So how do you differentiate, like what decisions are taken at the executive level and what decisions need to go to the board, right? And like, is there any criteria, or does the executive committee bring those recommendations to the board to take the decision, or how do you differentiate the decision-making levels?
Yeah, well, the brief answer to that is you're exactly right. The boards manage oversight of what management is doing. So when I say that the board, as leaders of the company, make these decisions all the time, that is true. Management is going to bring this decision forward. By the way, dividends don't only get declared unless the board says so. That's just a little legal point. And once the board declares it, it's declared, like you have to pay it. Just a little legal note there. But without getting into the intricacies of what's really the board's job or management is doing all this. The board's role is understanding what they're doing, or they're doing the right amount. And particularly if we went back, which we're not going to do, to that 6-piece puzzle, one of the things Susan mentioned was risk and risk profile, and the ability to give management what you think about risk, so that management knows how to proceed. For instance, sort of in that space is deciding, you know what? We think the economic forecast is such that we need to hoard cash. So that direction to management is that we want to hold on to cash. By the way, shareholders are always telling management and the board, no, give us the cash. Give us the cash. Despite they want to do more R&D, despite that when COVID hit, they needed to put money to sort of balance employees who weren't going to work. Shareholders were saying, that's great, give me the cash. They're one stakeholder. By the way, some boards gave the shareholders a big dividend, which was a surprise for a lot of folks. So yes, management runs the company. They do the day-to-day, but they get direction from the board. And really your job as a director is to ensure that the board is managing all these stakeholders in a certain way. So you give a signal and you have that oversight. Right, that's the short answer.
Let me just add just briefly too. So, if you think about there will be certain things that have to go up to the board, and that'll depend on the company. So a major acquisition will obviously need to go to the board. Smaller acquisitions, maybe not, depending on what the agreement between board and management is. But the board is, kind of guiding, pressure testing, looking for blind spots, and B, when management says, this is where I want to spend my money, the board's responsibility is to say, okay, how are we going to hold you accountable for it? And then to monitor it, even if they don't actually make that decision. So it's that, are you guiding always? Are you making the decision? Maybe not, maybe you are. But if you're not, you're monitoring the execution and you're holding management accountable for it. Miguel was next.
Yes, my question, sorry about that. My question was, given the stakeholders you have here on the slide, my initial sense would be the people who pick the board's members are the people, either institutional investors or the CEOs. So the stakeholders, is there a relationship between the stakeholders and who picks the board of directors based on the slide?
So it was a little choppy. Was it? I didn't hear the question.
It was let me repeat it because
Sure,
I think you're having a little technical glitches.
Yeah.
The question was that it's the shareholders that elect the board. So what is the role of the stakeholders vis-a-vis the board?
Vis-a-vis the board, right? Well, the only people who elect directors are shareholders. So that's a good point. However, the counterbalance to that is that, and actually the mandate for the board is to manage the company for the good of the company, which includes shareholders and other stakeholders. So sometimes the pushback you get from the board, boards push back. By the way, I gave that example of shareholders saying, "Give me a dividend, like give all the retained earnings to me." Part of the role of the board is to decide whether you actually do that or not, or whether you spend that money, and this is their fiduciary duty, that we're going to do R&D, or we're going to give bumps to our employees. So remember, about 10 years ago, Walmart spent millions of dollars and giving a bump to the employees when other people didn't. The market didn't quite understand it, so their stock dipped a little bit. But it was the board made a case that that was the right thing to do. So you have all these stakeholders that you must manage, but at times others will get different priorities. Now, I'm not going to go too deep because there's a legal answer to this, but that would take us a little bit off track. But to just understand is that everyone is involved here. Some will get priorities of the others, and that's squarely, that prioritization, squarely in the domain of the directors of the company.
And Caitlin, I'm not sure if you got any.
Caitlin, yes.
Caitlin, thanks.
If you go to the Portuguese, it's Ketelin, but yes, it's fine.
Thank you.
Quick one, and I think I don't want to go to a different tangent, but just so I wrap around my head. Like, there are some boards that I think I completely understand what you said, and they get together and they decide it all together. But is there, like, from your perspective, your participation, some boards that some specific activities are clearly denominated to somebody in the board, and that person takes an exclusive vote or an exclusive answer to that point? My example, right? I've been on a non-profitable board, and there is somebody really specific to manage diversity within the company, and everybody else listens and can chime in, but the final decision is given to one person only. And I would like to understand from your experience if this is common or no. Normally it is spread across, as you guys have been talking about.
Whatever organization you're in, and they have charters and bylaws which sort of state what the boards do, but generally the board speaks as a body. So no one person can speak for the board unless the board has granted that person or delegated that duty to them. By the way, that really happens. You have committees of boards that are responsible for thinking through issues, but unless it's delegated to them, those committees come back to the full board, make a presentation, and then the full board will vote on it. So full board must speak as one voice, and we'll get to some of that about when you disagree with the rest of the board, what did you do? I think we'll sort of later in another session. But the board speaks as a body, but it can delegate to folks to actually do something on their behalf.
Very clear.
But it doesn't do it that often. By the way, the one person they have by law delegated to actually run the company is the CEO. And then they put in limits about if we have a transaction that's over $1 billion, you're going to come to us. $500,000, whatever that is. You set thresholds that if you something of this issue, bring it to us. If not, go ahead, don't bother us.
So we're going to take 2 more questions and then we'll move on to the next slide. But James and then Samuel.
Thank you, Stephen, for this outline. In terms of, at some point, will we see that if there are any differences? I imagine there's a few in terms of managing stakeholders if you have a nonprofit corporation.
I'm sorry, that last point is about say it again.
In terms of the managing stakeholders, will there be some discussion at some point about the how to manage stakeholders from a nonprofit corporation? Because I'm sure there are some differences in these bubbles.
Here it is in 60 seconds, because we're mainly talking about for-profit corporations. But yes, nonprofits have stakeholders too. What nonprofits do not have, which makes them a not-for-profit versus a for-profit company, is that they don't have any shareholders who are the benefit inures to them, right? They're shareholders, if you want to call them that, or the benefit inures to the mission of the company, which is why for every single nonprofit, right, if we talk about a publicly traded company, we could talk about the stock exchanges or the SEC being a regulator. The main regulator of every nonprofit is the Attorney General in the state where it's incorporated, and they give he or she, the Attorney General, the domain on behalf of the people to make sure they're managed well. So the nonprofits they don't make profit and give it to people. They have a mission and all the money. By the way, nonprofits, I mean, Harvard's a nonprofit. They ain't poor. Right. And so, but all their money, what their retained earnings goes back. There's no question. It goes back into the company. It is not for anyone's benefit.
Thank you.
Gotcha. And so I also, to the point in the chat there, the only people who vote on directors are shareholders. And it turns out, if you look at your shareholder list of whatever company, that if you're publicly traded, the top 20 or top 50 shareholders are all institutions, unless you have a founder that has a heavy interest, like a Facebook or Meta, whatever they call it, and the founder has a large piece of the shares. But yes, institutional investors are the largest part of the investor community, and all put together, they're the biggest portion of those who have shares, and therefore they vote all those shares differently, perhaps. I wanted to turn to the ESG.
Before you do, one last question from someone who's had their hand up, Samuel.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Thank you, Stephen, as well. So here's my thought, because I'm trying to gather the concepts of what you're bringing up as far as managing stakeholders. Will there be any case studies of real life examples of board decisions that were positive or negative for the stakeholder? You know, I'm an advocate of believing the proof is in the pudding kind of scenario, but I wanted to make sure that, are we going to cover that in any of these discussions? Because that would actually help me understand better what to do and what not to do.
Sure. Well, I don't know if we have a case study per se, but we could bring up examples as we go forward in these sessions. But I'll give you one general example to think of, because we've all been through it now, so it's history. The pandemic, March of 2020, we all entered. Everyone, it's rarely you could say that. Everyone, we entered this pandemic, and one of the issues was, you company with your retained earnings, are you going to pay out shareholders if are you going to declare a dividend, or will you not declare a dividend, although you've done that for 20 years in a row, because you want to hold on to that money and keep your employees who will not be working for any time soon and pay them out? And that's why you're going to tell investors, we know you got a dividend for the last 20 years. We're holding back on that because we're using this money for employees, or we're holding back on it because we just want to hold cash, or whatever it might be. And so if you go back and think about what happened during 2020, many companies had to make that decision. There were a number of companies who went and paid a big dividend and then got a lot of backlash from their communities. How could you do that when whatever? And so that's not a specific example, but everyone went through that, had to make a decision on where were they going to put their excess, their retained earnings. So that's an example of of having to think about, how are you going to prioritize all these different stakeholders.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for the question. We'll have more examples that we rarely sort of use real names of companies because it's just from a corporate standpoint. We serve all of them, so we don't. But we may be so inclined at some point maybe to mention a name or two. Perhaps. We'll see how we'll do that. So the last slide in this last discussion was simply the takeaway of shareholders, particularly large institutions, matter deeply. What we've all become aware, and particularly when the onset of pandemic in 2020, is that there are a whole bunch of other stakeholders, right? And that you have to think about employees, have to think about your environment, all these different things. So that came to sort of a fruition. This slide just shows why there's such an intense focus on this thing that we call ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And it's a mixture of the perfect storm that has taken years to get us to this point of the different laws and regulations, how the market has reacted, and of course, my favorite in purple, which is cultural and current events. And I say it's my favorite because I always say this to my law students or B students who I teach, which is the way we feel about a corporation in America depends on what's going on. That's it. It's the simplest statement and easy to prove, harder to actually make sense of. But legislation are made up by Congress or your state legislature who are responsible or should be responsive to the people who elect them. And when people want change or accountability, then it acts. And it so happens we get a lot of laws after bad things go wrong. After Enron and a number of corporations were caught in fraud and bad doing, we get Sarbanes-Oxley. These things so there's always a response by Congress to do something. Sometimes it works to bring that accountability. Sometimes it does not. By the way, in the space that it does not, and this is an 80-year history in America, whenever Congress wants to touch corporate pay and what CEOs get paid, pay goes up. Just the way it works. Pay goes up. That's a whole nother conversation we can have, which is why I always say, Congress, don't do anything. Stop. But what has happened over the last 10 years is that someone else has stepped in to try to regulate pay. Who's that? We saw the last slide. Who's that? Shareholders. Shareholders now, after Dodd-Frank, another piece of legislation in 2010, in response to stuff that happened before, that was response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis, shareholders in America have a vote on compensation. It's called say on pay. That's the colloquial term. And shareholders have used that vote in the last 10 years to try to some point have some say on pay. As those in the governance space knows, we have more than 10 years of evidence that just about 98% of companies who are subject to it, their pay passes. So only 2% sort of are in the penalty box. And there's some folks who say that's not enough, but that's sort of where we are. So this slide is showing that you have this intense focus on the environment, social, and governance because of all these different things happen, scandals, financial crisis, current events, how we feel about stuff, the pandemic, all that stuff has this focus. I'd like to say this, and we're going to turn to a definition here, which is, and this is not popular necessarily to the general sphere that you deal with on every day or even the boardroom. This term is called ESG. I also recommending just taking the E, the S, and just striking out the G. Because really, when we're talking about this, it's not really the G. And shareholders talk about the G and sort of things they want out of governance of the company. But really, when that is used, they're really not talking about the general public's not talking about the G. By the way, where this term comes from, so you can win a trivia contest at some point, is that in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, at the UN, there was a group of folks, and most of them were not from the US, who were working on how do we get shareholders, particularly large pensioners, these large institutions, to understand that their money, which is supposed to be long-term, is being used to invest in companies, which if you ask them personally, directly, do you care about X or do you like X company? They would say, absolutely not. I don't think they're good people. Oh, by the way, your pension money is being used to fund them. So they thought about how do we sort of make this, how do we make the pensioner and others sort of truly understand that? So they came up with this term ESG. Actually, I think it was GES at first. And then they, governance, environment, and social. And then they said, look, if we put social at the end, so again, this is trivia, it's going to be lobbed off because people will forget about it. So they put the S, social, in the middle, and so they can never be lost. Environmental, social, and governance. And I guess they were right then, that you can't drop the S because it's in the middle. So we have this term, and often Susan and I and my other colleagues in the Board Leadership Center have said, this term has gotten out of hand how people have used it. We've been around this so long, we know how this should be used. People, but it's being used in a different way and defined a different way. This is a nice little definition that we've used. There's some other definitions we use, but it's about making business decisions for the long-term enterprise value of your company on a comprehensive set of indicators, which may include non-financial indicators, and it may include financial indicators which you've never measured before, but they matter. And they mattered 10 years ago, but you never did it. Now you're getting the pressure to measure them. So the idea around climate change and asking companies about their climate footprint is not simply from a moralistic aspect of we lived in an environment where there were a number of powerful people who said climate change doesn't exist, to where those folks have started to wean and they just say, we're not responsible for this thing called climate change, to the point of folks pushing back and saying, you might be, but we can't even tell because there's no disclosure on what you do there. And so we like to think about these things and purely what material stuff that you're doing as a company that matter to your enterprise value, that may be environmentally focused or maybe socially focused, and that they matter. They matter because it matters to your long-term value. And that's when you look at the large institutions such as BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, TI Craft, Fidelity, American Funds. That's what they're really focused on. So they may not be pushing a particular agenda other than value and making the case of, if you have your factory sitting on an iceberg and that iceberg is melting, why should we wait until it melts and you fall into the ocean to ask you, what are you doing about that? Are you moving your factory now rather than waiting until the iceberg sinks? It's a purely basic fundamental question about how you're running a business, which makes absolute sense. Some of it these days, and I'll turn to Susan for her commentary on this, has been skewed as it means something else. Indeed, you do have shareholder bodies, some of them. They may be union focused or socially focused, like a fund that has exclusions and they don't invest in defense companies and they don't invest in tobacco companies, and they have a particular mission of which their clients want. So it involves more than value, it involves their own values, which their own values of people who understand why they're doing it. So they may have a message mixed in front of that, but for the bulk of investors, these are business decisions, and they're asking these questions and being forceful about it because it matters to them. And so that point when I'll get to that question that someone has their hand up, that point of that director, which I said in the beginning, when he said, I just don't, why do these investors, these institutions, why should they have a say on this? Why is their voice bigger than somebody else? And the simple answer is that those investors have investors of themselves who, if these basic value questions weren't asked, they'll go to another investment firm that asks those questions. So they're responding to their constituency. The other thing is that they're asking questions which are really material to how you run your business. So Susan, I know there was a question and you might have a comment, so I'll pass it back over to you.
Yeah, let me just add on to that, and then Diana will get to your question. You know, I always love it when Stephen and I get into these conversations because he comes at it from this deep investor background. Yeah. I come at it from working in Fortune 500 companies in the consumer product space, where ESG is about investors, but it's also about, like, if consumers think that you're using slave labor to make your products, they may not be buying them. and people may not want to work for you. You know, and if your company is making the types of products that people just don't feel are consistent with their values, they don't feel good about working for you, and you can't attract and retain the people that you want to. So that's where, you know, going back to that earlier slide, that's where the customers and the employees come in as stakeholders. And we see this more and more, particularly with the Gen Z crowd, that they really care about this. And I mean, I'll, you know, tell you, you know, personal story. My 27-year-old daughter left a job because she didn't like the values of the company and took a different job because she liked the values of that organization. And we see that over and over and over again. And McKinsey just came out with some research that consumers are making purchase decisions based on the values of the company. And so that's another reason why all of these issues are board issues in ways that they haven't been before. You know, in the past, maybe it was someone would write an article criticizing the company, maybe someone would make a fuss in the media and it would be a one-day story. It's different now. It deeply affects the company's ability to succeed. You know, both from the sense of strategy and attracting and retaining talent and customers, as well as engaging with stakeholders.
Susan, wasn't before we get that question?
Yeah,
we were in Huntington Beach, and you told the story of running into. I don't know how you ran into her, but it was a young lady, very, very young, and she was talking about the burger chain in California, who I'm just losing their name. That everyone loved, In-N-Out Burger. There we go.
Yeah.
And she talked about how much she liked In-N-Out. Prior to saying that, she had talked about being a vegetarian, so I was confused. Like, so how? Wait, that's a burger chain. How do you? And we did confront her on, but you don't eat their products? She goes, I don't, but I like the way they operate. I like the way they treat their employees. I like the way they have their environmental statement. And it was an eye-opening moment for me about how much, and this wasn't a direct consumer. She doesn't eat their burgers. It was that she saw them as a good actor.
Exactly.
As a good citizen.
Exactly. And I understand, Eric, thank you for putting that in the chat, that it's Latina owned. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either.
That's great.
That. All right.
Yeah.
Question.
Diana.
Hello. So my question regarding ESG goes on, what is the adoption of ESG across other countries, particularly for global companies? And are there significant differentiations on the indicators? I think in some of the ESG indicators, some countries actually are more advanced than what the US, for example, has been. But do we see any type of what is your view on this global adoption and of course on, you know, probably countries like India and Europe, and how is that playing and how that plays at the boardroom in the boardroom?
Do you mind if I turn it back to you? What's your thought on that? So you're absolutely right. It's U.S. versus the world in some aspects, and that there are many other outside the U.S. where they're more advanced from a legislative standpoint and just for an understanding, and they're sort of what we call stakeholder countries, which is employees, the community, everyone first, and then you come to shareholders, which some would say in the U.S. is the reverse, is shareholders, and then there might be other people or might be other stakeholders. But what's your thought on the dangers of the U.S. being a laggard? Because
I'm more than I don't know that I see it with a danger. I am actually believe that ESG and some of the indicators, and as you pointed out, we've been looking at them but not paying the proper attention. I think it's valuable. I'm not seeing it more as a danger. I'm more thinking of as a global company. For example, we have a significant presence in India, and India government has views on what the indicators for ESG are for India, right? So as a company, I think the point I'm making is, regardless whether or not you're an American company, this plays in a very global dimension that needs to be truly incorporated as you start thinking, right, how all of that implies. I think is a movement towards something positive. As you stated, it's also depending on what the current situation is. So therefore, in the US, we saw a very important push towards racial equality, and which is great, and you wanted to hold it onto it, and that is not passing. So the same I'm thinking on. We will probably see patterns in other countries. Europe, for example, with decarbonization, they have been ahead of us, which is great. Now we're catching up. So I don't see it as a danger. I'm just thinking on it plays in the boardroom. It plays on how you bring the entire company, especially with a global presence, on understanding what this will means, and it will impact some of the operational side because it requires effort and different approach.
Well, I think you, thank you very much. I think your commentary sort of says it all. I may have chosen my words a little bit wrong because I was thinking from a regulatory standpoint, the danger is that if you have global companies and in all the other regions, they're making laws around this and you don't make laws, guess what becomes the governing law? The other countries. That's actually what the SEC is focused on, which is that if we don't make laws or regulations, then your global company that has operations in 50 different places across the world is going to comply with those operations, and they're not, but that's going to become the standard because they're not going to make a different product for all 50 jurisdictions. They'll make one product and just subscribe to whatever India says in here in the United States. So that's what the SEC is up against. Like if you don't legislate, other people have already done it, and that will become the basis. Back to you. There were some other questions that came up. Other hands I see.
Mr. Andre.
Thank you very much. Is it a little oversimplifying a little bit to talk about ESG as if the arc flowed in only one direction, like time axis or something? What do you do if you're on a board with the backlash that many ESG initiatives invite, and how do you avoid, the catch-22 of offending, or more than offending, antagonizing one side or the other? I think, Disney, for example, is a perfect recent example, to name one. But as a bank city for which I work, has had issues also with its policies around unverified gun sales and that type of thing. So these are the stakeholders are not monolithic in their drive for ESG. How do you handle that?
That's a great point. By the way, when we're asked about directors, I sort of say under my breath to Susan, well, damn it, that's why you're a director. Like, if you want everything to be easy, I just don't know what to say. This is your role with management, and we could give you some stories about how that has gone because we've been asked to come in and mediate what might be an issue around these. But that's the modern board. You're going to get these questions and what you do with it. And I'll just jump to the punchline. I prefer boards get a definition and understand what the environmental and social means to them, and get aligned between the 9 board members and the CEO and his management team or her management team on what it means for them. Because often people will use the term ESG, and I know, Susan, you just had it done yesterday because I talked to our colleague who you're working with, when you're doing a interview around climate change, and they're using, the person you're interviewing kept saying ESG, and they said, wait, we're talking about climate. Which, because they were using this broad term, and you said, no, literally climate, okay? It's inside of the E. So one of the things is that if we can drop temporarily the use of the phrase ESG and actually talk about what we're talking about. So if we're talking about climate, talk about climate. If we're talking about antibiotics and the rise of antibiotics used in our foods, which may be causing a decrease of immunity, then talk about that. And when you talk about the issue, then I've found the board can actually get to what's the risk, how are we looking at it, and get to it. Talking about ESG in general, if you're putting it all in, you get all the emotions of people who are pro this, pro that. Now, I would ask you around Disney, where we are today. And everyone knows, I'm using Disney. I said I wouldn't use any names because everyone knows what the case out there. And we just had someone who's being the crap out of them. We're trying to declare that he's running for governor. It's a business issue for, they're literally being attacked about where they do business and how they do it. It has nothing to do with any issue which is ESG related, to be honest, at this point. Right, that fight was a while ago, and their CEO who had led that fight is no longer there. Now they're trying to protect their turf. Every single company would do something related to that. And I think part of the issues that we advise on is being able to understand what hill you're going to die on. What hill are you going to might put up a fight, but you'll drop if it happens, or what issues are just not your issues. And we found when companies are absolutely clear on what environmental and social issues are absolutely critical to them for maintaining value, then they're able to say for those issues that are not material, they're gonna stand up and say that. And I give the example of, if we talk to Coke or Pepsi, they will tell you one of their biggest environmental issues is water. Why is it? Without water, they can't make their #1 product. And both companies have had the experience overseas, outside the United States, being kicked out temporarily because there was an issue with whether the folks who lived in that particular jurisdiction had good access to water when all the access was going to one of their bottling plants. Water is deeply meaningful. If you bring the Save the Whales Coalition to Coke, I assume they'll tell you whales are nice, they're not our issue.
Thank
They're
you. So
staying
you're
focused. But you got to understand what you're going to focus on.
You're drawing a difference between. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Recapping, you mentioned maintaining value, and that seems to establish to draw a difference between maintaining value and maintaining values. But I guess that's what it is.
Yeah, and listen, and part of this is there's a conflation of the two, and then there's the legal answers. But by the way, I think conflation is where we live. But I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's like everyone came out after George Floyd was murdered and say, we're going to have all these diversity plans and things. I'm not sure why they didn't understand that there were people who were going to hold them to that. And what you're seeing now is folks saying, wait a minute, so we're 2 years in, 3 years in, I got a question about that. A lot of folks came out and said, we're going to be net zero by 2030, 2050, which, by the way, is easy to say because none of those folks saying that are going to be there in 2030 or 2050. They're now being held to account, right? And so there's a lot of things that you say and folks are focused on now what you do. I'm sorry, I cut you off, Susan.
No, that's okay. And Andre, what you raised is where I was going to go, which is this whole concept of values. From a board perspective, first and foremost, what are the company's values? Secondly, how much risk is the company willing to take, knowing that you're going to piss someone off because everything is so politicized. And I think, Stephen mentioned Disney. I think in a more contained context, at least for now, Target is a really good example of that. Mm-hmm. They've got a customer base where they are selling certain objects for Pride Month. They've got an employee base that's getting death threats over those specifically same objects. And how do you measure those? Did they do the right thing by withdrawing those products? Did they do the wrong thing? There's no answer to that, but clearly they thought through it. They thought about it, not in terms of it's because someone complained. They thought about it in terms of we have to protect these stakeholders who are employees and who work in our stores. And that's the kind of conversation that would be had at the board level, is how does the company think through these issues, which without necessarily weighing in on every single issue, because oftentimes there's no time to do it. Oftentimes it's something where you're going to get disagreement among the board, and it's ultimately the CEO that's going to have to stand or fall based on those decisions. But from a board perspective, having those discussions up front about how do we think about our values and how are they going to influence those decisions when they do need to come up? What's the process for making them? Who are the people in the room that are going to be making those decisions? And how do we know that they're thinking through them thoughtfully? So those would be board issues. Ivana.
Thank you so much, Susan. Very insightful. We spoke about like legislation and to your point, like the importance of it, the impact it has and so forth. As board advisors in this role, that how do you suggest to best anticipate or get ahead of pivots due to legislation or regulatory focus, right? So that it's not like a reactive and we're more like, is there like a pipeline or place as to how this legislation and topics get to the level where our organizations where we are sitting as board advisors have to, in a way, plan ahead and be part of that and not be reactive to it.
Indeed. Very simply, I would say the board's role in this process is really ensuring that management has a process in place. You'd be surprised at how many do not, or they're just developing it, or it's just not as robust as it should be. And what I mean by that is the ability to I'll give you an example. I was asked to come into a company, energy company, where the board and management, a very big energy company, Fortune 100, where the board and management I think, had different views on what should be said. And they were in a community, in a state where the legislature had gone, very red. And they had legislation that I think it was over abortion, about how they felt about that post the Dodd decision. And so the board want to understand how we're going to manage it. Will we say something? Will we be active on it, or will we not? What will we do? And essentially, what we did was the board needed to get comfortable that management had their finger on how they were going to think about these issues, how they thought through potential issues that might be coming down the pipe. The fact that, very crucial, that the board wants to know or should know and be comfortable with, does the CEO bring in the right people in the room from management? So not simply the lobbyists from DC, which they had folks in DC who were lobbyists or government affairs, but they talked to the people in charge of investor relations and HR, and they had everyone in the room helping make these decisions. That's what you want to do as a board. Do you have a process that's going to help you, CEO, make the right decision for the company? And that's what you want proven out, that they have the right decision. You might have a particular opinion on X, but unless you have the majority of board thinking that, it's just your opinion. But where you can get consensus on is the robustness of a process around these issues.
Let me just add one thing too, just as I'm kind of thinking this through for this group in particular, the whole ethics of tech, particularly as we're looking into the brave new world of generative AI, those are really challenging issues, obviously. And think about the stereotypical board member who is lucky if they can figure out how to find their board materials on their iPad. I'm serious. You are all in spaces where you have a lot to offer in those discussions. Where does tech fit into the ESG? It's one of those weird things. There are some governance gurus who think that it should be ESTG or ETSG with technology is added on. Others say cyber is part of the G. There's no, and it really doesn't matter. But the reality is that all of these things that we're talking about, stakeholders, values, how investors are feeling, and what they're thinking about in terms of risks and also the opportunities for the company, those technology issues, if you can position yourself as someone that can help think through those from a strategic perspective, you are going to be golden in any boardroom.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And so let me sort of close out with this. So this is my last slide, Susan, I'm going to show here or have you show. So thank you very much, by the way, for playing the slide master.
We go back and forth on this.
I
so
love
it's
it that
good.
I didn't have to do it. This slide is just it's my representation of how I like to think about ESG. I already told you, like, I think we should abandon that term when we're talking amongst each other, but it's a term that's being used, so we should know what it means. But I really think about it as what, as a board member, I should consider about being a going concern. And it sounds so simple, is that your main job, your first job in corporate social responsibility is to remain a going concern. And we could talk about how Lehman Brothers did on ESG. They don't exist after 100+ years. There's no conversation. They violated the golden rule right there. So it's, how do I remain a going concern? And I think it's schizophrenically by thinking about three things at one time. First is, how do I make money? What's my business model? And is it still strong? If I'm not on the road of making money, by the way, I find it funny that tech is now in this space that, yeah, there's something called a balance sheet, which says that you make all this money, and then you actually have to make retained earnings, which they're now all focused on because everyone says you're going to need to focus on it instead of just having revenue, but having a large expense that doesn't match revenue to make profit. You got to make money. You got to make a profit. Let's think about that. But at the same time, I want to think about what externalities can I get pinned with? And everyone has negative externalities. By the way, there's some externalities which some folks are trying to pin companies with, which are pretty interesting, such as your responsibility for folks not having a job, or your responsibility in Silicon Valley was for it still is the responsibility that all these companies had free lunch and free food all around. So the local vendors, the local delis wouldn't have as much income because no one's going out for lunch because they have free lunch and free food around them. That actually was brought up by local legislatures in Silicon Valley about charging a tax for that so that these folks, these local entrepreneurs and small businesses can survive. Very interesting. But you want to think through what are the externalities that are beyond some of the very that should be obvious. You know, I have a plant and it emits smoke into the atmosphere. That's probably one of the more obvious ones. But thinking through that and then thinking about the social license. I exist here. And I'm allowed to exist in this community where I have my business here in Pacoima, Illinois, or somewhere in foreign lands, because the people, legislatures, governors, mayors, what have you, allow me to be here, and they could take that away. They can wipe me out if they don't think I'm a good citizen. You want to think about those three things, and that's where you start the conversation. That's what you always want to think about how do I continue to make a going concern, such as the water issue with Coke and Pepsi. They think about it deeply because they were kicked out of, I think it was Myanmar and some other South Asian spaces a long time ago. Their social license was pulled. And that exists for everyone. We sort of don't think about that, particularly in the United States, but at some point, particularly out west, we will have a water crisis, worse than the water crisis that we already have right now out west. Those issues are going to come up. You want to think about those. I'm not saying you need to disclose it yet. I'm not saying you need to do that much yet, but you need to have that on the horizon, and that's how you think through some of the social environmental issues. So I will say this. So we talked about what this term means. How we should think about it. And the first thing is that really getting a definition of what it means to us. What are the material issues that are truly meaning to us? Being able to back up authentically what we say. So we're going to be net zero by 2030. Like, you literally should have a plan. And that's not woke. Like you said, how are you going to get there? By the way, that's what investment analysts do every day in an industry, which is that you said you're going to do something and none of your other peers have said it. We want to know how you're going to do it. They ask that all the time. How is it going? My God, the JP Morgan analyst can every single quarter ask the Southwest Airlines CEO, why aren't you charging for baggage? Everyone else does. Everyone else does, but you don't. The CEO responds to that. By the way, that's his domain. That's the domain of the company. You know, maybe at some point they reverse that, but they haven't done it in the 10 years the guy's been asking the question. So here's the point here. By the way, let me end with what the example I gave earlier, which is this financial services director saying, yeah, we don't really have an ESG footprint. And we were saying in our heads and privately, well, you have a whole bunch of server farms, don't you? Who take energy. Didn't think about that. You're a financial services that funds many of folks who are emitters or miners or what have you. She didn't think about that. And this we know for an absolute certain that you have employees. Never crossed her mind. And by the way, that's scary. You know, as someone who used to vote on directors, I don't know if I would ever have another conversation with her because I just think she's clueless. And she's not. She's a decent person. But it's that her mindset just wasn't on these very, very important issues that to value. That it just wasn't in her frame. And I actually blame, she's partly to blame, but I also blame the company for not being not setting up in the right way of how to think through those issues. And that's what we don't want to happen to you as you go on this journey. To really think about these issues and put it into the sentence and the language of business and where it makes sense and ignore a lot of the fluff. And it's so hard because there's a whole bunch of fluff out there and a whole bunch of politics. And I get it. Someone is in charge of at your company of playing that game. They should be involved. But if you stay to the core, most of us are going to get through this. So, Susan, back to you and to our friends at HITEC. I think I see Ms. Aguilera trying to get rid of us because we're 2 minutes over.
I think we are a couple of minutes over. So thank you. And Kristen, back to you.
Thank you very much for just such an insightful and all of this wealth of information. I hope you all enjoyed it. We will see each other again July 27th, I believe it is. I will send you the email with the link for the replays as well as the deck. Susan, Stephen, whenever you guys get a chance, if you can send that my way. And if there's any questions, always feel free to email me. Thank you so much. Big hug, big kiss to everyone. Ciao.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy Memorial Day.